Throughout history, we look back at the various styles of art that defined an era. Gaming, being an art form, is no different from the crude 80s arcade machines, the Vaseline-smeared graphics of the 90s and early 2000s, and here we are in modern day with the obligatory slander on how it's all based on retention metrics and acting as a washed up car salesman trying to tack on as many add-ons to your fancy new game as possible. But a common thing older people will say is that certain things were better back in the day, which is why I have compiled a bunch of primarily tactical shooters from the late 90s to early 2000s. I have only played a handful of them, so I can't experience these through rose-tinted glasses, but we'll see how fun they are, if they have any gimmicks that are missing in today's games, and of course, how well they aged mechanically, because some of them, oh boy, they were absolutely painful to play. I'm not going to mention the graphics too often, but you just have to let me get it out of my system. Some of these look absolutely horrendous. Rainbow Six looks like I'm playing in a Truman Show style dome, but graphics for a lot of these are a non-factor, especially for you, because that's just how things were back then, and there was nothing better that could be used as a bar of comparison. But ladies and gentlemen, step into the time machine, because we are going to go back in time. Oh, and also this video has a tier list in it because my monkey brain kind of says tier list equals views, so I hope you enjoy.
I say again, I read. Ceasefire, ceasefire.
Firstly, I want to point out a couple of similarities between a lot of these games. Now, just like your wife suggested, let's do some role play. The year is the late 90s to early 2000s. Picture your younger self. Yeah, you did have a lot more hair back then, but you go to your local EB Games, GameStop, or whatever your country's equivalent is. You browse the selection, and one game on this list catches your eye. You might ask your legal guardian to buy it for you so you don't get refused service like the one time I tried to buy LA Noire from JB Hi-Fi.
You fuck young boys, Valdez.
Or you spend your hard-earned money that you slaved away for at your shitty job back then. On the car ride back, your excitement is mounting. You rip open the game cover and read the manual. Of course, after you give the game a good old sniff, because God, I miss that new game smell. You open up the manual, getting to understand the game mechanics and hopefully get to view gameplay pictures. Once home, you pop the disc into your computer or console and sit through the long install time, listening to that hard disk drive work overtime. But finally, it's all ready to play. Your excitement is like a child on Christmas morning. Now, to add on to this hype, you sit through a lengthy splash screen detailing the situation of the game, and it just hypes you up even more. Because these days we spam the spacebar to skip all the legal notices and the 50 bajillion seizure warnings, because we just want to get to the gameplay, even modifying launch options to completely bypass them. But back then, those intro movies had you sitting through them at least once because they were just so goddamn cool. Because I feel like a lot of games these days, they kind of just don't put anything into it because they know the player will just skip forward to them so they can bombard them with ads for the in-game shop or hop into a server to boost those player count numbers. Now, yes, after a while they become annoying and you want to skip them as a kid, but I love to watch them because they got me so excited, especially the ones that use real footage or kind of hyped up this fictional Cold War-esque world where, you know, the Russians have gone rogue once again and, you know, you're this freedom fighter that has to stop them. I really do miss that. But once that's over, you're onto the main menu with some banging soundtrack playing. But once you actually play the game, I feel like there is a hard distinction between the difficulty of AI, because if you thought the bot AI in Ready or Not was difficult, oh, poor you. Sounds like a colossal skill issue. Just aim and pull the trigger faster. But in some of these games, I found myself on the verge of tears, wondering how my childhood self even beat some of these. I found some of the AI surprising at how that they were able to use the environment to outsmart me. And then there was also some AI that would take a piece out of the style of and playbook of human wave offensives with no concept of self-preservation, and the game kind of just turns into duck hunting simulator. The last thing I'll mention is, in a lot of these games, the shooting mechanics are bad. Heck, some of them don't even have a physical gun on screen, and I find that the focus isn't too heavily weighed on the gunplay, which is something different to what I expect in today's game. Expecting them to be fun to use, especially in like a tactical shooter, I expect them to have weight and beef to them, because I want that shooting process to actually feel like I'm handling a real gun. Yes, obligatory Australian man doesn't know how a real gun is like in real life, whatever, but I feel like these older games put more focus on how you approach a situation, such as breaching a room, finding a good spot to set up, and ensuring you check every possible angle, because if you do so, it might not be down to who has the fastest reaction speed, you or a robot. What I'm implying from all that I've said so far is that the anticipation and excitement is something we don't feel as often these days, where you just hop onto the Steam store, input the 3 numbers at the back of your bank card, which you should definitely leave in the comments, and after 30 minutes, the game is installed. But within that 30 minutes, you've already seen all the reviews on YouTube, or you might have been bombarded with negative discourse online before the download is even done, and you're already questioning if you should just refund it. Yes, I am specifically looking at you two fucking disappointment. I fucking hate these games. But let's move on to the first game on the list. And the first one should be this one in particular, because it's hailed as the one that created the concept of the tactical shooter genre, at least from a first-person perspective, and that is none other than Rainbow Six. Not this one. You play as an elite special forces unit that deals with counter-terrorism all over the globe to ensure peace and prosperity. If I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it kind of took me way too long to realize that SWAT 3 is very identical, both in terms of menu and storyline, where there are various scenarios that range from hostage rescue and bomb threats, but in Rainbow Six's case, there is no diplomacy, no de-escalation. You fire at will to remove the threat and rescue the hostages. Now, this game has such a cool feature that actually blew my mind away. In a game like 0 Hour, you have the map overview and you can draw out a battle plan that would never really be followed. In this game, you can recruit specific characters. Yes, real soldiers with a background that are badass as hell. No gimmicks. This is their background. This is their resume of competence. You can assign them to teams and draw up a battle plan, which is one that they actually follow. This literally means you could probably beat the game without even leaving the comfort of the van. For 1998, I think this is an amazing feature, but this does lead on to the AI, because if you think, like I said, Ready or Not is worse and is oh so unfair, because even on the easiest difficulty, you'll find yourself getting absolutely vaporized without even having a chance to respond. Thankfully, you can switch to the remaining team members as a form of life system just to peek the exact same corner and get domed. I have below freezing temperature IQ in terms of Fahrenheit, so I don't learn from my mistakes like a monkey would, but you have a nice range of equipment at your disposal, the most overpowered one being the heartbeat sensor, which I didn't use because it was basically wall hacks, but I do like how when the body sort of goes cold, it mimics that on the heartbeat sensor. I found that really cool, but I like how there are stakes at play during the campaign, because if one of your operators dies, that's it, because it was upsetting when the Australian man died when we had been through so much together, but mechanically, the game is pretty clunky and there's very little guidance to see how you're doing throughout the level, because when it says rescue the hostages, I thought I had to actually guide them out similar to 0 Hour, but it turns out I just had to eliminate the remaining suspects, which whether it's in 1998 or 2025, it's an timeless classic of problems of these kind of extraction SWAT style shooter games where you're just running around looking for the last suspect or fucking hostage just to get drop shotted after 20 minutes of struggling. But it's a classic, and I implore people that play Rainbow Six or any game that is a tactical shooter that's developed in modern day to at least see the origins of their favorite series. But overall, I think it's aged alright. Nothing too fantastic, but it was also a little tilting at times, which is why I'm going to be putting it in A tier. Moving on to the game, in my opinion, that aged the best and still holds its weight graphically. Yes, I know I said I wouldn't mention graphics, but I'll compliment them when it's due. But this game is still incredibly difficult to this very day, and it's none other than Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon. But a fun fact, when I was 12 years old, I had this bad boy installed on my crappy dual-core Pentium PC that was being thrown out from my dad's work, and I literally could not beat the first level on the easiest difficulty. And it turns out many years later, I realized that I can just save the game as I played, because there were no checkpoints, and I thought it would do the checkpoints automatically, and it didn't. So I thought I had to do it in one long shot, so I just spent hours a night trying to beat it without knowing I could have just save scummed. But alas, here I am at 24 years old with better motor skills and knowledge with tactical shooters. You'd assume I'd be able to breeze through the first level. No. This game kicked me in the teeth when I was 12, and today it's still possibly one of the hardest tactical shooters I've ever played that doesn't sort of like cheese it with like a glitch or an AI being completely unfair. I simply just get outplayed. Why is it hard, you say? Well, it's the fact that the AI has super soldier aim that can completely negate you peeking or pushing a corner that causes you to either find an alternate route or use heavy ordnance to deal with it. But the big selling point of this game for me is the blend between RTS and FPS, because you are able to create individual squads and send them off somewhere else, such as flanks. All seems fine until you realize you made a tactical mistake and you just hear them one by one getting brutally slaughtered over voice comms. I also really like the different theaters, because at each new level you don't know what to expect. It ranges from storming the literal red square, like Bradley's in Red Square, which is, it's something that kind of gets said now these days, so these guys kind of foreshadowed it a little bit. But that Red Square level is absolutely diabolical. If you think the Viet Cong and trees are bad, imagine Russians on a veranda or balcony, whatever you call it. It's just a whole other level of difficult. But you also have nighttime stealth raids on dockyards, forests, swamps. The issue that I have is with the stealth mechanics. They aren't that good, in the sense you could snipe someone from a fair distance in the dead of night and they'll still be able to lock onto you. This game is not for the faint of heart. If you are man enough to play this and love hardcore tactical shooters that really emphasize that you take things slowly, plan it out, scout ahead, and make sure that you land every bloody bullet, I think you're gonna like this game. Because after all, if your operator dies, they stay dead. The story isn't that bad. It's consistent with other games in the genre, especially in regards to Tom Clancy. That being, something happens in Russia, ultra-nationalists take over, and they want to recreate the USSR, of course, because, you know, no one ever wants to recreate, no, geez, I gotta be careful with what I say. No one wants to recreate the Russian Empire. In media, I need to express that. In media, no one wants to recreate the Russian Empire, but they always want to recreate the USSR, but I feel like this might be delving into the post-Cold War relief the people felt at the time, I imagined. But come along, these super operator tactical fucking soldiers of the US Army come to save the day of the independent countries. It's not fantastic, but I do like the pre-mission powwow and also being able to create a plan of attack, coupled with the banging soundtrack. All in all, the game aged damn well, in my opinion. Sure, the AI can be a little difficult, but if you take things slow and don't run around like in fucking Zoomer like me, you'll enjoy it. It's great if you want a hardcore tactical shooter that'll really put your patience to the test. Honestly, I know I'm probably looking at this with rose-tinted glasses, but I genuinely think it's just a fantastic game, so I'm gonna have to put it in S tier. The next game belongs to a series that I was looking for so long, ever since I watched the documentary on the North Hollywood shootout. Okay, documentary air quotes, it was actually a Megadeth video from that one song, 44 minutes. It's just so freaking badass, and I've been looking for a game that sort of depicts this in a way from the police perspective, but that is none other than SWAT 3. Now, I've had people say, why not Ready or Not? You should add that to your list. Why not SWAT 4? It's so much better. Well, the truth is, I have pulled down SWAT 4's pants and glazed the ever-living hell out of it enough on this channel. Usually, when I talk about Ready or Not, I'm like, yeah, this this is a good game, but SWAT 3, yeah, like it's just so much better, like old is gold, right? But I've never had a chance to actually talk about SWAT 3 in depth, and that is what I'm going to be doing. But SWAT 3 took a slice out of Rainbow Six in the sense you get similar lore with terrorists running amok and you must put a stop to it, except to some people's disappointment, you must follow ROE and actually make an attempt to arrest the enemies. You can use less than lethal, but it's just utter pain in this game, which is why I always resort to good old reliable armor-piercing rounds. Rather than having a full-on planning phase, the game mimics a rush sort of emergency scenario where you might have to make a mental note with sometimes rushed or unreliable maps. Now, the game, truthfully, has not aged well. For starters, it took me 3 hours to get the game running at the right resolution, but mechanically, it can be pretty frustrating. If you yell for compliance, I thought the game was glitching out because this guy would just not stop yelling it over and over, and it drove me insane. But trying to micromanage the squad can also be frustrating since there's no hotkey to report suspects, but at least you don't need to pick up individual pieces of evidence like a hoarder from Fallout 4 when playing SWAT 4. Now, this isn't an issue in single missions, but in the campaign, the game has a unique leadership score, which is determined on whether you follow ROE and report suspects and civilians correctly, which can vary from straight up liquidating and saying, yeah, they're dead, call the morgues, or they could be moaning on the ground in pain and still talking, and you have to report it separately. I actually kind of found this feature kind of cool yet cumbersome at times. A cool thing is, right, if you arrest a civilian and you call in for trailers to come and take the suspect out, meaning you can see the map actually get cleared out over time, which is a feature that was sort of advertised in Ready or Not. Yeah, I'm just defaulting back to shitting on Ready or Not, I apologize, but people were like, okay, trailers have been called in, why aren't they showing up? But it was only isolated to like one game mode, which I didn't really like. I wish in the campaign they would actually show up and extract the civilians. I found that kind of cool, but SWAT 3 has this feature. But the biggest selling point for this game, while mechanically it's frustrating, graphically, yes, it's just not that good, and also the gunplay can be a little interesting at times. The main beef is in the AI. For something that released in 1999, the fact that your friendlies are able to clear a room or hold a position and cover every possible angle of attack is so freaking cool. Yeah, the enemy AI can be a little tilting, but I found it wasn't based on unfairness, but more so on me running around and not taking things slower and pieing a corner properly. Of course, you have moments where you have 0.3 seconds after spawning and a shootout breaks loose, but thought actually needs to be applied to every door that you encounter. Of course, you can cheese it with the Opti wand, but I've already given my opinion on using that piece of equipment where you're essentially a bitch if you use it. Like, you're gonna go in raw, no rubber, and just have to deal with whatever's on the other side of that door. But staying on the topic of the AI and making sure you actually are aware of your surroundings, you have to pick up guns placed around a house, for example, because if you don't and the suspect actually becomes aware of you, then they can actually run and pick up one of these weapons around the house and use them against you, meaning if you are able to secure all the evidence, then there's less chance of you actually getting into a firefight. Another cool feature that I love is you're able to switch between stealth and dynamic mode, and the soundtrack and voice lines are in accordance with that. Whoever composed the soundtrack for this game cooked. They absolutely cooked, but the NPCs themselves are unique in their behavior and loadout. You have a disgruntled man that just kind of lost the plot, picks up a sniper rifle and starts going duck hunting on the nearby freeway. Why would he have a fully automatic AR-15 in his house? Well, the game is based in California after all, so maybe him having that wouldn't be too realistic, especially if it's just an ordinary civilian who has no ties to organized crime. And then on the contrary, you have bank robbers who are fully decked out in Kevlar and have armor-piercing fully automatic weapons and are less willing to go down without a fight. Even the religious figures in the church, like the priest and the patriarch, or I don't know church lingo, but their voice lines plead for forgiveness of their hostage takers. I thought that was a really cool feature, since that it's sort of like aware of what's going on and they play into their role of like a religious figure of pleading for forgiveness. I really like that attention. But if you take take the SWAT series and just chuck Ready or Not in there, this game is a hard sell, because compared to SWAT 4 and Ready or Not, telling someone to play this game in particular over the others is difficult, unless they want to get it for a nostalgic kick. Quite frankly, it didn't age too well, but I'd say the biggest aspect of this game's legacy is the fact that, yeah, the shooting mechanics are an afterthought, but it shows you that a game can still be good if there's proper attention to detail towards things that might make you say, huh, that's a cool feature, I didn't realize that would happen. But I can't put SWAT 3 in S tier. It has things that made me wish the devs of Ready or Not would apply to the game, but I'm gonna have to put it in no lower than A tier, quite frankly, because it was fun, even though a little tilting mechanically at times. Now, if there's one thing you need to know about me, I love getting free games. I collect them like Pokemon cards. There are plenty of games that I've gotten for free and I've just never touched them, but they just look good in my collection. But this also means I sleep on a lot of games, and this relates to a game series that has me absolutely hooked now. Now, try and follow along, this might get a little confusing. You play as an OSS sniper who cosplays as a German, or he is German, but he also cosplays as a German, to shoot mostly Soviet soldiers to prevent the Soviets from getting super secret atomic bomb information. Now, being 2005, mowing down Germans was all the rage in video games, and the game had to give you a warning from the start saying that, hey, the Soviets are the people you'll be shooting mostly. The game has a couple of things going for it. The first is it reminds me of the Hitman series, where you're plopped down, you get your orders, and you can deal with everything how you see fit. Yeah, I mean, you can pick up a PPSH, go in and mow them all down, the same way that Hitman allows you to go in guns blazing, but that's not really, I wouldn't say the intended way to play the game, but it's not the right way for me or a lot of people who view these games to do so. Because the way you're really supposed to play this game is like a German Simo Heya, if that's how you say it, and it makes it a true test of your patience, waiting for the perfect time to shoot. Because a cool little feature is that you can wait for artillery to explode as a way to mask your shots so you don't get detected. Now, Sniper Elite's AI is kind of like a shit sandwich where you compliment it then insult it, because there are certain things about the AI which I'll show you that made me say, hey, that's a pretty neat feature, that's kind of cool. But on the other hand, the AI can be incredibly tilting, with them being able to lock on and just laser you instantly unless you make that one shot count. Because depending on where you shoot, the ragdoll will compensate for it. If you don't land a headshot, they might go down in pain and start moaning, alerting nearby enemies to come over and pick them up and take them to safety. I found it absolutely hilarious watching this one Soviet pick up his comrade and book it like an NFL linebacker, but there was a lot of attention put into the game mechanics. For instance, if you run around like a madman and you stop and try to steady the sniper, you'll see a heart rate monitor that'll allow how steady you are and also how long you can hold your breath for. Whereas if you take things slower, be patient, you can actually wait for that perfect moment a lot easier. You have to account for bullet drop and even wind speed. Even the bang of artillery nearby can cause your character to sway the weapon, adding in a challenge for you to compensate for. You can study patrol paths to set up a Viet Cong style ambush with I just like to say the word punji, like tripwire traps. The game encourages you to relocate after shooting so they don't try to get smart and close in and kill you. You have to ensure you use the surrounding buildings to your advantage with your camouflage, and if the enemy, for instance, is injured, they can retreat, take cover, and try to flank you. It makes you feel like a lone operator behind enemy lines with no help, because by this point, World War II is over. You're not trying to win the war, you're more so blended in with Cold War politics that are just starting to emerge by having to try and stop the Soviets. And this is all done with World War II aesthetics, because back then, like I said, many games were set in World War II and they put a nice little spin on it, trying to do something different. But while I do hype up this game a fair bit, because at first I did really enjoy it, it wasn't until I played it more in depth that I realized that mechanically the controls can be, they aren't that good. Even with the frame rate fixes, you still get a hint of that ice skate feeling, and also the camera controls and the movement controls going from sprint to a walk, crouch to prone and standing. It does feel like the game was made for console, then made onto PC, but back then, you know, console ports, or PC ports of a console, I don't know, like, getting a game from PlayStation and putting it on PC back then was a little more messed up and harder to do compared to today. And that's really the prime reasoning as to why I would be putting it in B tier. But moving on, the next game on the list was like discovering the lost city of Atlantis, but then being immediately disappointed at the wasted potential. That is none other than Elite Warriors Vietnam and Line of Sight Vietnam, both made by the same developers. But the similarities is that these games have you play as a super secret MACV soldier deep behind enemy lines in the dense jungles of Vietnam. Now, a thing I've said about Vietnam games in the past is that I like it when they depict it with lots of bushy and lots of jungles in it, so it makes it feel a little more authentic in a way. But after playing these games, I kind of realized for gameplay reasons, it might be harder to implement than I thought, because in these games, the jungle is thick, and half the time you don't even see any of the VC and you end up blind firing into the bushes. You could make the argument that it's historically accurate, but purely for gameplay, it's very tedious. So look, the distinction between these two games is that Elite Warriors is a hybrid RTS where you control the movement across a large map that has you have random encounters before you get to the objective that can either help you or hinder you. And you also have the option to rest or continue marching on through the night, which also depicts that if you do get into an encounter where you have to actually move around and shoot enemies. But Line of Sight Vietnam takes a more narrative approach and abandons the RTS elements, but collectively, and the thing that saddens me is the concept is so freaking good. In theory, you must use stealth to either neutralize or avoid VC patrols, but the AI and game mechanics constantly work against you, because rain or shine, night or day, the AI can absolutely laser you from halfway across the map. They can materialize out of thin air and spawn behind you. Trying to use the sniper rifle, which is quite frankly the whole reason why I got this game, and for some reason they don't have the XM21 suppressed variant, which I think would have fit really nicely into this game with the whole stealth aspect, but you only get the non-suppressed version. But in Elite Warriors, you're somehow more accurate when you don't use the scope. But yet again, the crosshair can be a straight up lie, sending bullets way off before you were aiming. The friendly AI is absolutely brain dead and won't follow you. The enemy AI has elephant-like hearing and it can hear the sound of a twig breaking 50 meters away. And the thing is, there isn't a middle ground that feels balanced, in the sense it's either get utterly vaporized with little chance of retaliation, or you tone down the difficulty and settings and then you're just running around like John Wayne drop-shotting VC as if the toddlers cosplaying in a trench coat and were given a gun. Because the thing is, in the settings, you can turn off this realistic damage model where if you get shot in the head, you might be able to take a couple of body shots, but it sounds great in theory for a tactical shooter to depict that accurately, but like on the other hand, the AI is able to just 180 you and drop shot you in the head, but also they're able to be placed practically outside render distance for you, and they're able to shoot you from halfway across the map, and it just became so incredibly frustrating. But look, okay, I know that it seems like I'm dogpiling on this game, but mechanically it's not good, especially for its age, and I do wish we'd get a modern version of this, because that's something I would actually pay good money for, because the concept is great. I also do like the blend of having the RTS elements of it, because there's a game called I forgot the name of it. It's called Radio Commander, and it just has you sit in a tent and micromanage units, and also there's story elements. It's a great little game. I highly recommend it, and I kind of like that aspect, but also having to be able to move around and explore the world, sort of like the blend between the two games. I really did enjoy that, but it did not age well. Now, there is one game mechanic about these games, and I also should have mentioned this with Ghost Recon, that utterly tilted me and just made it so frustrating, is the stun mechanic. Now, I've never been shot or shot at, but in these games, if you get shot, then your guy will flinch or get stunned, and it's just, oh my god, it was so tilting to deal with. But I had to constantly quick save after every bullet that was fired because I thought VC would sneak up behind me and demolish me. This unfortunately led me to not enjoy my playthrough, thinking it was just tedious and hoping for it to be over. Also, someone said Elite Warriors is like Oregon Trail, but in Vietnam. Pretty good comparison, but I honestly, I can't recommend this game unless you really like the Vietnam setting and also want to play something old, because let's be honest, there aren't a whole lot of single player Vietnam shooters. There's a couple of Vietnam multiplayer shooters, but I mean, yeah, multiplayer is really the tactical shooter scene these days. You can't really get a single player game with a dedicated narrative where you don't have to stress too much about having to deal with, other players, either being toxic or getting domed really consistently. If you just want a relaxing Vietnam game set in the Vietnam setting, you can't go wrong with the Viet Cong series, and I'd highly recommend that over this game in my opinion. I'm gonna put both of these games in D tier, and I don't enjoy putting it there because when I read into these games, like, wow, these are gonna be freaking cool, but I was unfortunately disappointed. But moving on to the next game, it's based on a famous movie and real world event, which is none other than Delta Force Black Hawk Down. Not this ADHD simulator that is actually kind of fun, especially for a free game. The classic one which has you fighting through the streets of Mogadishu. Compared to other games on this list, this game is much more chaotic, where you must deal with hordes of enemies charging at you, as well as RPGs flying towards you from every nook and cranny as possible as you're flying in on a helicopter. I love how you have some leeway on how you complete objectives, and listen, some people will say this game is on rails or very narrow and limiting, which I kind of disagree with. Sure, it's not open world, but it feels like it's open world, and you can really use the back streets and alleys to get around to the objective. And for some reason, I wrote in my script these routes being a mimic of. A mimic of what? I think I kind of fell asleep when I was writing this in bed, but it's a mimic of Mogadishu, the real city. But the game is fairly easy with health packs and the AI not being too challenging, especially on easier difficulties. But I definitely approach this game with rose-tinted glasses the most, because there are numerous issues that I found having playing it once again in 2026. The first being the friendly AI being completely hopeless, which honestly kind of a common theme with these games unfortunately, but they can breach a room with a flashbang like in Ready or Not, but sometimes they don't. They always lag behind, contradicting a direct order from the player, and one of the most frustrating things is that there will always be one guy who sneaks up behind you, once again, common thing with the AI, because you could be balls deep in a firefight and you get the shot indicator coming from behind you. I suppose it makes sense since the AI is technically flanking you, but I found that just a tad frustrating, how you clear out a whole area and another one just pops out of nowhere. There are stealth mechanics. The good thing is that if you're trying to hide in the night and you go near a light source, they can detect you, and there are also barrels and whatnot which has fire in them that can also illuminate you. But as a whole, the stealth mechanics are very simplistic. You could drop someone right next to another enemy and then they won't really notice or have any reaction to it. But this is a game for people who more so want to feel like a super soldier, but also be able to drop the enemy with one shot. But I do like, for the people that are gun-ho, there is a balancing factor, because you do have to follow ROE, which is actually really hard to do, and I like that challenge in this game, because while you are clearly dressed as a soldier, right? Now, some of you might be US Army veterans, for instance, you might have been in Iraq or Afghanistan, you can clearly tell the soldiers from the civilians, right? And one thing that I've heard that these veterans would say is that you can't really tell between a civilian and someone that has ill intentions, but they all look similar, and there have been a couple of moments where I'll turn a corner and there'll just be someone there and I'll get absolutely jump scared and end up mowing down a civilian, and you will also get penalized for it. But the civilian AI will also throw rocks at you. I thought that was a nice little touch, because you're here on a peacekeeping mission, you're here to help them, but the local population wants you gone, and it's like, brother, like, I'm trying to help you, like, why are you against me? Now, my own bias would put this in S tier, simply because, despite the problems, it's incredibly fun, and I do have a lot of nostalgic memories tied to it, but I'm not going to be putting it in S or A tier. Being completely objective, I don't fucking know what the words mean, but like the one where I'm not being biased, I will be putting it in B tier, which it's not a fantastic game, but it's also not bad by any means, barring some of the AI issues. Now for the last game on the list. Also, if you're expecting like some other games that I put on the list, yeah, I'll explain that later on, what's going to happen with the rest of those games that aren't in this video. But this one game, the whole script, I'm leaving it unchanged, but I have to add this little disclaimer. It is America's Army 2002. Now, I can't play it because there's only like 10 to 5 people that play it globally. And when I did try to play on these servers, it was simply unplayable. So I can't actually give an objective, I can't remember the words. I can't give an opinion on it because once again, I can't play it. But based on all the reviews and people that I talked to about this game, they did say that for the time it was revolutionary and groundbreaking, and that it was sort of like a Counter-Strike game, except it was free. Well, free for me and everyone outside the US. The US taxpayer dollars paid for the game because, you know, when you've got, you know, what, like 700 billion dollars to dump into a game, I mean, you can make something of quality, funded by the US taxpayer, so thank you guys. But this game was just... My experience is very odd, and this is what I'm going to share about it. This game, like 6 Days in Fallujah, has controversy surrounding it in regards to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, since it's perceived as an extension of the militainment of the US Army. You know, the game was released in 2002, so you do the math, but it could be viewed in the same way that Top Gun is just propaganda for the US Navy to hopefully drive up recruitment numbers. That's what people are saying, not me, but the latter definitely achieved its goal. But aside from that, let's say you managed to get a copy of the game in this day and age from a sketchy website, which you should not do because you can get the game from this website. Very good. You can download the game for free. They manage servers, so highly recommend these guys. Shout out to them. But you know when you'd install a free game from a really sketchy website and then a bunch of extra programs get installed and you didn't realize? Well, I thought the same in this case. I had no idea what this was, but I instinctively opened it up. Lo and behold, the US Army is in my computer. This is like installing War Thunder and Prigo rises from the grave and says, "Привет, comrade. Today I teach you how to use tank to counter pesky American javelin." But the best thing about this is the bloke's name. His name is literally a Marine. Like, his destiny was set from the moment he was conceived that he should become a Marine. But no, he's a part of the US Army. But he just explains what each of these things are. There's also a thing called the Cyber Athlete Amateur League. But you know what, a lot of video games, tactical shooters don't really do this, but in like casual games, you have to unlock classes through playing it. This game is a little different, and I've got to give it credit. It's actually a pretty interesting way how to unlock roles, but you have to go through boot camp. Now that I think about it, these guys were actually way ahead of their time, because I say, hell let loose squad, they gotta have tutorials on how to play certain roles. These guys did it, but I'd still found it pretty funny because of this one thing. To play the medic role, you have to literally sit down in a classroom and get lectured on first aid. I have never in my life seen a video game do this, but I mean, it's to some extent a pretty helpful resource. And the lecture does show some pretty disturbing imagery. There's just a photo out there to show you, yeah, this guy got his leg blown off. That could be you if you decide to enlist. But now that I've mostly gotten that out of my system and kind of shitted and mocked the game, but this game solved a mystery for me. This game is actually very special to me. A long lost mystery from my childhood was solved thanks to this very video. Let me explain. I remember playing a game where my dad put me down in a firing range. I pick up a loaded gun and instantly fragged the drill sergeant because, I don't know, I didn't like his voice and I kind of just felt like it. And then I ended up in a literal jail cell. From the age of 5, I had no idea what this game was until now, because when I spawned in the firing range once again, I got a weird feeling of deja vu. So I picked up that loaded gun and, well, turns out this was that game that I played when I was 5 years old, and I didn't know the name, and I was wondering what game that was for all my life. And now that it's been solved, I have found solace. So I can't really put it on the tier list. I mean, I might put it in S tier simply because it solved that lifelong mystery of mine, and everyone that I've talked to that played this game back during its heyday will say, yeah, like this was a good game, so I'm just gonna trust your word on this one. But now, before I sign off, I know there were more games in the list I showed that should be in the video. I put them to the side because I felt like the video would be just way too long, and I definitely was feeling some semblance of burnout as a result of having to deal with, 20-plus-year-old jank. But Operation Flashpoint was probably the big one for a lot of you guys, but I've put it off to the side for now, but I'm going to include it in a separate video with Arma 2 and the rest of the Arma series. And I also might throw in the other games in other videos in the future, which you can show your expression of interest by leaving a comment and like on the video. I tried not to be too negative talking about these games, but unfortunately I kind of did with some of them since I didn't have rose tinted glasses, and I kind of did get a little tilted at points, especially trying to actually get these games to run on a modern resolution was pretty goddamn painful. But I hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.